billion on defenses for Greenland, a highly strategic asset coveted by President Trump.
We need Greenland.
The Arctic island is not only 3 times the size of Texas, it's also full of rare earths, oil, and gas. While its location gives it a commanding position for trade flows and defensive posts in the region. The U.S. currently has 1 military base on the island. On a recent visit there, the vice president criticized Denmark.
You have underinvested in the security architecture of this incredible, beautiful landmass filled with incredible people. That has to change.
So here's how Denmark is ramping up its effort to protect Greenland, and why the U.S. abandoned many of its own posts across the icy terrain decades ago. The U.S. began stationing forces on Greenland after Denmark was invaded by the Nazis during World War II.
There was fear in the U.S. that Germany might occupy Greenland, which is an incredibly strategic location in between North America and Russia.
With Copenhagen under German occupation, Greenland urgently needed both defenses and provisions. So Denmark's ambassador to Washington, in an enterprising and controversial move, single-handedly struck up a deal with the U.S. The agreement made the U.S. the de facto protector of Greenland, allowing it to establish fortifications there. Over the next several years, the U.S. expanded rapidly, building military posts, radio stations, and airports across the island.
They needed to cut off German weather stations on the East Coast, providing meteorological guidance to war efforts in Europe. Second, the U.S. wanted to secure the cryolite mine in Ivedut. At that time, cryolite was the only way to produce aluminum. The U.S. obviously needed that for war efforts. Third, there was a need to be able to ferry aircraft from the U.S. to the defense of the United Kingdom, and that needed an airstrip in Greenland to make that possible.
Following the Second World War, Denmark was able to reestablish its links with Greenland.
The Danes came back and said, okay, now we expect you to go away again, but the U.S. obviously didn't have that in mind.
Instead, with rising tensions with the Soviet Union amid the Cold War, a renewed treaty was signed in 1951.
The U.S. and Denmark formalized an agreement that allowed the U.S. to remain in Greenland and basically use the same military installations and expand them to protect Greenland in the same way it had protected them against Germany, to protect it against the Soviet Union during the Cold War.
One of the most ambitious projects saw the U.S. construct a military base under the ice. Originally described as an Arctic research center, declassified documents later revealed its mission was to convert an area of Greenland into a launch pad for nuclear missiles. The so-called underground city housed tunnels, laboratories, and buildings in the frozen wilderness. But after the Cold War subsided, the U.S. shifted its focus and Greenland's military importance waned. The U.S. abandoned many of its posts, in some cases leaving behind military equipment that remains there to this day.
And since 2004, the U.S. has really only had military presence at one base in Greenland, what used to be known as the Thule Air Base, but it's now the Pituffik Space Base. At Pituffik, the U.S. has upgraded early warning radar systems that are designed to detect intercontinental ballistic missiles, potentially from Russia. And it's got space surveillance systems as well that help support the missions of NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, which is the U.S.-Canadian Joint Command.
In contrast, Denmark has only ever had a minimal security presence in Greenland.
The basic division of labor has been that the U.S. has taken care of whatever is needed for the defense of the North American continent, and the Danish defense has taken care of Coast Guard, civilian Coast Guard functions, etc.
But now Denmark is facing increasing pressure from the U.S. to ramp up its own defense spending for Greenland.
There was a lot of criticism from Denmark, a lot of attacks at the Trump administration, at the president, at me, at others in our administration for saying the obvious, which is that Denmark hasn't done a good job at keeping Greenland safe.
So Denmark has very firmly pushed back against this message from the Trump administration, but they also closely guard their messaging and haven't really been available for interviews thus.
The Danes have also been sending more concrete signals, announcing billions of dollars worth of new Arctic defenses. The Danish package includes drones, ships, and 2 additional dog sled teams, which are trained to operate in the most vast and difficult to navigate areas of northern Greenland.
There's 2 reasons for it. One, I think Denmark recognizes that now with the current global tensions and Russian aggression in Ukraine, it is necessary to both send a message to Russia, but also actually boost the defenses of Greenland in case the territory is subject to some kind of aggression. But then I think it's also a signal to the Trump administration and some kind of concession to Trump, who, as we know, has made it clear that he wants the U.S. to control Greenland. I think the Danish government is hoping by making some concessions on security to the U.S. that can somehow smooth things over with the Trump administration.
As Denmark invests, the U.S. also retains the right to expand its military presence in Greenland again.
In the defense area at Thule, the U.S. can basically do what it wants. It would be nice to tell Denmark and Greenland of their plans. Second, there is a provision that if the U.S. sees any other defensive needs, there will be agreement, it says, between Denmark and the U.S. and now Greenland to allow new defense areas. And then, of course, in the event of a war, it's basically for the U.S. to decide on their own what should be done.
Some Danish and Greenlandic politicians say that if Washington is concerned for Arctic security, U.S. military investment would actually be the most straightforward avenue to explore. But currently, the U.S. appears to be focused on pushing Denmark to spend instead.
And it seems like the U.S., at least to some extent, wants Denmark to take over some of the responsibilities, some of the tasks that U.S. soldiers used to do during the Cold War. Whether that's realistic or not, I think is a different question. Denmark, at the moment, is quite stretched militarily and financially, being very occupied in Ukraine and in the Baltic Sea. And Denmark has already announced a 70% increase in defense spending over the next 2 years. Some of that will go to Greenland, but a lot of that will also go to Ukraine.
Overall, Greenland's vast size and harsh climate make it almost impossible to defend. And recent attention by global powers is leaving some locals feeling vulnerable.
And I think even though temperatures might have dropped a little bit now, Greenlanders are concerned that they will now be the subject of geopolitical strife